Let's start our conversation about this exhibition with the title. Where does the matter of the glazed fence come from, and how does it reference the idea of the borders, its permeability, its nature?
I chose this title, The Matter of the Glazed Fence, because I wanted to bring in a certain contradiction. It shows the contradiction that has many layers in the works themselves. We're having a sculpture that is called Voting Booth, and it works a lot with the private and the public realm. So the idea of a semi-private space, like in a voting booth, you could have a space that is invisible, it's private, but then these pattern, you can say a fenced-in pattern that it has is like a shape of negative bricks, as if you would suddenly notice the walls are transparent. So there is this about solidity and permeability. And in terms of a voting booth, of course, it is this question, are we keeping our privacy? Are we keeping our freedom? Are we influenced, or is it our own choice?
It's also interesting to point out the history of this work, right? As it started in Georgia in 2023 as part of your exhibition in Tbilisi, and then how it had the presence in Berlin, and now it's in Lisbon. So do you think that genesis of this work kind of changed? The meaning of this work changed as it changed the geographic location?
Indeed, the shape started in Georgia, so I was very much inspired of the balconies there. They have these semi-transparent constructions around balconies that create a semi-private space, although it's outside. It's like hanging on a building. So using this shape of a kind of a balcony within a voting booth means this space in between the private and the public realm. And bringing it here is like on the other side of Europe, you can say. It's also really interesting for me. Watching the struggle in Georgia becoming independent from the superpower of Russia, and then here the old democratic societies being in freedom, in a free world, and we're kind of voluntarily at the moment risking to lose this democracy. So it has this from two sides. At the same time, in this gallery, Cristina's gallery has this minimalist and very conceptual approach. So it stands here as a minimalist sculpture, which I really appreciate as well. And it has this notion too, as you said, interference in the space. And so people walk and then they have two entrances and they see twice the same. So it references again the doubling that I used a long time ago in CCB here when I had an exhibition in 2005. And then many other works I did in that gallery. And then I have these glazed works here hanging. Right. There are like placards, also political placards hanging in the space, hanging in front of your face. So it is somehow in the way, like as if there are also limits, borders. And then at the same time, then they're glazed, like you can see through, but they have this semi-transparency and transparency, like a play with it. They're not always transparent, and some are elective, so then you see yourself suddenly, or you're kind of thrown back on yourself. So it has these two things. And I was also interested in the opening seeing people from two sides. Like I'm always interested in, if I use images in photography, I like the idea that you see it not only from one side, but also step back, you can go around and come back and see it from the other side. And also people see you through, but also you see yourself going backwards, looking back. And the aspect of looking back for me is very important.
So maybe this is also a good time to ask you a few questions about the text-based works here on view that are part of 2020 series of LaGuardia Vistas that you created for New York Airport, right? It's based on this project. So can you tell us a little bit what made you choose this specific texts and how you worked on this archives and how it became part of this exhibition now?
A lot of my recent works in the past 5-6 years were works in public space. And so through the works in public space, I brought a political context more openly into the works with text. It emphasizes things that have been laid into the double meaning works already. And it has this internationality, of course, at the moment with a reflection on democracy. Fiorello LaGuardia, who was the mayor in New York in the 30s and 40s, he had really impressive, very short sentences that he put out in his speeches, like exclamations that have a strong meaning And so I thought it's good to use these and to show, especially in terms of America, it's kind of unbelievable that these powers, these almost social democratic powers, have been there. And
right.
that they are still, these thoughts are still around and they're still current. So that's why I've used these short sentences like "there's no time for political fence building." It's also like a grid, another
right.
form of grid on the city. So there is images of the contemporary city that are overlaid with these old texts from the 20s until the 40s, and they are still current. So you have these old and new layers. So it's also interesting for me as a German to see that in this time where Germany had this really dark era in history, and that in America was this uprising of modernism.
Let's talk a little bit about transparency, that we touched on different kind of forms and formats in the last few days. But as it is a central connecting theme for your practice, right? In sculptures as well as in works and installations, how installations, through bringing in the light from the outside sources, they become kind of the space of its own, right? This transparency creates its space. So can you tell us a little bit about the process and how it changed over time for you? Your look at transparency and how layers of transparency can create this not so transparent space in the end when you put a lot of them together.
I actually started in the 90s already using transparent layers of images in installations. So I wanted to have a photograph where you can look through the photograph into the space, which is always the photograph using as memorial association, like an aspect of memory.
And membrane,
comes in,
right.
like an aspect of memory that comes in suddenly, or a conflict between subjective and collective memory or knowledge that you have. Suddenly you have a reference in your mind of a photograph that you've seen.
Right.
And where is it from? And suddenly it comes in your mind. So this kind of thinking it's always about how do we perceive what is truth for us. And this was for me like the use of photography that made it possible to bring another layer into the installations. And the window works. Photography is about light and is a transparent medium. I used it literally in a window, certainly, to show this fragility. And here in the glassworks, there is always the attempt of bringing together the very fleeting moment of photography and the projective layer and the materiality of sculpture.
Right.
And in the glasswork, which is actually pigment burned into the glass, it's like a thick paint, but it is also transparent paint. So you have, it transfers it into material, let's say. It becomes glass.
The material.
It becomes glass,
right.
Transparent glass. And so it has this materiality and durability at the same time. But it is still has this fleeting aspect of the glass, and the crispness. So that's what I wanted to bring in here.